All right, let's get right into it. Welcome to today's explainer. We're going to unpack a pretty fascinating analysis today about the macroeconomic forces that are quietly threatening personal wealth, savings, and honestly the purchasing power of everyday people. The sources call this the interest trap. Now, I know it sounds like a heavy topic, but stick with me. By looking strictly at the numbers and the structural math behind our financial system, we can understand exactly what's going on behind the scenes.
So right now, there is literally an invisible clock ticking in the background of every single American's life. The U.S. national debt has officially crossed a staggering $39 trillion. I mean, that's 39 with a lot of zeros. But as massive and dizzying as that top line number is, the source analysis points out something really interesting. The total balance actually isn't the most immediate danger. The real danger, that ticking clock we absolutely need to pay attention to, is what it costs to simply maintain that massive pile of debt.
Get this. For the first time in history, the United States is paying $1 trillion a year just to service its debt. And that is just the interest. To put that into perspective for a second, that annual interest bill now officially exceeds the entire national defense budget. It's a staggering, almost incomprehensible expense. And as the analysis rightly points out, this isn't just some abstract government problem happening in a vacuum. This affects us all. To unpack all of this, we are going to look at 4 key areas today. 1. The ticking interest clock. 2. The $2 trillion gap. 3. The $11 trillion auction. And 4. Protecting your financial fortress. Okay, starting off with Section 1, the ticking interest clock, and the math behind the ratio. To really understand the scale of the debt, objectively, we have to look at the debt to GDP ratio. Right now, that sits at 122%. So what does that actually mean? Well, it means the total debt is 22% larger than the entire economic output of the United States in a given year. And hey, we aren't making a political statement here. We're just looking at the absolute mathematical reality of the current financial system. This 122% figure is the structural baseline that necessitates that massive $1 trillion annual interest payment we just talked about. But here is the crucial point. This is how it connects directly to you. The sources note that this $1 trillion interest bill is a direct threat to the purchasing power of your future retirement. Think about it. If the government's interest bill just keeps expanding, what is actually guaranteeing that debt? The analysis suggests that, effectively, your future 401k distributions and Social Security are serving as the collateral that's keeping this whole system afloat. It's like an invisible hand reaching right into your sunset years. Moving right along to Section 2, the $2 trillion gap, or the math the IRS hides. Let's cut through all the noise for a second and just look at the raw yearly budget math. The government expects to collect about $5 trillion in taxes this year, but they plan to spend over $7 trillion. When you subtract the revenue from the spending, you are left with a massive, completely unavoidable $2 trillion gap in a single year. You just can't ignore a shortfall of that magnitude. So, how exactly does a government fill a $2 trillion hole? Well, it has to borrow more money. And here is why this matters so much to your daily life. When the government steps into the financial markets to borrow $2 trillion, it creates intense competition for cash. The government is essentially fighting with everyday borrowers for those available funds. And all this massive demand for cash fundamentally pushes interest rates higher across the entire board. Let's zoom in on that micro-level impact for a second. The government's need to pay its own interest creates real collateral damage for you. Because they're competing so heavily for cash, the rates on your mortgages go up, the rates on auto loans go up, and ultimately your overall investment returns can really suffer because the cost of capital in the broader market becomes incredibly expensive. The macro math trickles all the way down directly into your personal wallet. Which brings us to Section 3, the $11 trillion auction. The medicine and the tax. Let's break down this auction math as simply as possible, straight from our source data. The US must refinance $9 trillion in old existing debt that is maturing this year. Now, add that to the $2 trillion in brand new borrowing needed to cover that annual budget gap we just looked at. That means the Treasury has to pull off a staggering $11 trillion auction in a single year just to keep the lights on. Now, think about the immense pressure of having to find buyers for $11 trillion worth of bonds. If the investors buying those bonds get nervous about that 122% debt to GDP ratio, or maybe they're worried about inflation, well, they are going to demand higher interest rates to take on that risk. And if the rates on that $11 trillion auction go up even a tiny little bit, the government's annual $1 trillion interest bill is going to explode even further. It creates this vicious compounding cycle. And that creates a pretty profound dilemma. As our source material starkly puts it, this inescapable interest expense forces the government to choose between currency debasement or slashing social programs. Neither of those options is painless, right? Slashing social programs like Social Security is politically incredibly difficult. So mathematically speaking, the path of least resistance historically tends to lean heavily toward the other option, currency debasement. And that brings us to a really critical concept from the analysis, the hidden tax. To fix this explosive interest problem without slashing programs, the government is likely to use the only medicine it really has left in the cabinet, which is printing trillions of new dollars. But printing money to pay debts isn't free. It devalues the existing currency. It literally devalues every single dollar you've worked so hard to put away for your sunset years. That ongoing devaluation is the hidden tax on your savings.
Finally, let's look at Section 4, Protecting Your Financial Fortress and Trusting the Math.
The absolute most foundational piece of advice from the analysis is this: you cannot simply budget your way out of a devaluing currency. If the hidden tax of money printing is constantly shrinking the purchasing power of your savings, clipping coupons and skipping your morning coffee just isn't going to cut it anymore. You have to take proactive measures to ensure your wealth is actually outpacing that structural devaluation. So here is exactly how the source suggests you go about building that fortress. First, focus on growing your income. Your earning potential is always going to be your best first line of defense. Second, own non-printable assets. You want to hold things that a government cannot just create out of thin air. And third, stay invested in high-quality index funds. By trusting the math and keeping your wealth in productive, resilient assets, you keep the power in your own hands rather than falling victim to the interest trap. Wow, okay, we have covered a lot of structural macroeconomic reality today, moving all the way from a $39 trillion debt down to your personal portfolio. I want to leave you with this final vital question based on today's explainer. Is your retirement the collateral for the interest trap? Take a hard look at how your wealth is positioned, trust the math, and make absolutely sure your financial fortress is truly secure. Thank you so much for joining me to unpack these numbers. Stay curious and keep learning.